Welcome to First Responder Financial Freedom Podcast. We talk to first responders all over the nation who are investing and working on businesses outside of their first responder jobs. Our goal is to motivate and educate each other and help provide a better financial understanding for a better future. Now here are your hosts, Mike Webb, Tyler Thrush, and Aaron Foster.
All right, guys, we're back. It's all three of us today. I missed last week. Sorry about that. It's Mike, Tyler, me, Aaron, and our friend and favorite lawyer, Diana Kahn, who is the premier lawyer for the Maryland Real Estate Investors Group, here to talk to us about a whole bunch of stuff from wills and LLCs and trusts, asset protection, stuff like that. So, Diana, thank you for hopping on again with us. I know the first time was a little bit of a hiccup, but now we're all squared away, and you can blame me for it, and I'll take the blame for it.
I love it. And thank you for having me. But can I give you a little bit of shit? Did you just say I'm your favorite lawyer? Shouldn't I be your own lawyer?
Well, you told me I couldn't call you if I get arrested for certain things. So you're my favorite lawyer for what I need it for.
Fair. I do have something under control when you get arrested as well, though. So
cool. Then you'll refer me then. Got it.
Good.
So give me the elevator pitch of who you are, what you do. I know you're based out of Baltimore. Let's just start with the first part of this.
So I am a one-stop shop for quite a lot. Vertical integration and business building. I got you covered. So I own a title company. I own a law firm, UK Law. I think I got my little slogans right there. And I also own a real estate brokerage, a property management company that my husband heads up, and a contracting company. And really, we're vertically integrated to a point where it's just anything that's what most of your database or like most of your audience does, right? It's a lot of flips, real estate. It's just a lot of the talks of like, how do you grow wealth so you're not doing traditional business or a traditional 9-to-5 job? Like, how can you grow yourself in a way to accomplish whatever your whys are? And my law firm is my biggest bread and butter. It's where I focus. I help investors. I help a lot of people who are in small businesses or going into real estate set themselves up for success and set up so they can protect their whys, which is, I think, everybody's goal for this, right? Like, Aaron, your why's probably, I don't know, eat more Cheetos. I don't know what you're into. Mike's might be his kids that I heard in the background. Everybody has a reason. There you go. Everybody has a reason as to why they do the things they do. So my law firm is really there to empower you in whatever legacy you're building.
That was a very eloquent answer for some people like me. Mike, go ahead.
So, Diane, I was just going to say, like, obviously we got people that are from all over. So obviously you're in Maryland, but a lot of these things we're going to talk about, generally speaking, are applicable regardless of what state you live in for the most part, correct?
Absolutely. So we're going to kind of focus on what is it that you should do when you set yourself up for a business, or, why should you do estate planning even in your early 30s? There's no early time. Really, my law firm is estate planning, but I'm all about people above the age of really 18 should have estate planning, especially as part of their business structure, which I think is a little bit different.
Mike, let me ask you a question. Do you guys have, in your negotiations with your union, do you guys have contract and wills in place for y'all?
No. So, but I actually used to head up so there's a group called Wills for Heroes, and it used to be run by the Maryland Young Bar Association. And it was basically like newer attorneys. They would do a one-day shop at the Union Hall, and you would come in with your significant other after filling out like a packet, and they would generate, I don't want to say a boilerplate will, but for the most part, like it was a basic will. And then that way you had something and it was free of charge. But then whenever COVID happened, they quit doing that. And I don't think it's ever really got back off the ground yet. So,
Tyler, did y'all's department do anything like that?
Yeah, we had it provided, I want to say at the union as well. I haven't heard about it in a while. The funny thing is I've actually been thinking about doing that as like through Maltese Mortgage. So just offering it to everybody that are my clients, and then anybody obviously who's a first responder in SoCal, just kind of do like a one-day workshop and help them out, because not a lot of guys have trusts that I'm aware of, very few, and I think it's not good. So
Tyler, I just volunteered my entire staff to help you.
Perfect. Let's do it. There we go.
So I I don't want to take away from Diana, and that's an awesome offer. Thank you. So in DC, we have it through our union as well. But I would say less than probably 10% of the guys of our 2,000 person department have one. And I don't think I've heard anybody ever talking about a trust. So what's the difference between a trust and a will?
Sure. So believe it or not, follow this example because it's so stupid, but it works so well. Everything you guys own, just imagine it fits in a book bag, right? Just follow that example. So Aaron, whatever you're drinking right now fits in a bag. Everything, your house, your assets, they all fit in a bag. Non-realistic world, if you say that you died, right, your bag drops to the floor, and then it is your family's responsibility to pick it up. If you die with a will or without a will, the process is really the same. We take that bag to the courthouse. We show the courthouse, hey, here's the bag that my loved one left behind. If you have a will, then we follow the instructions you left with the bag. This will go to my kids, right? But before your kids get it, we're going to open the bag up. We're going to pay off all your debt. We're going to pay off quite a lot of debt. Most people are like, I'm not going to have debt when I die. If you die in America, you're going to have debt. Palliative care is expensive. Care at home is expensive. Aging at home is expensive. All of that is expensive. So we take your debt out. We pay taxes if there is taxes, if you're worth more than 5 million, and then your family gets it. The house that you currently live in, the house that you have, if your kids sell it after they've gotten everything through, they'll pay capital gains on it because it's not their primary residence, it was yours, and now they've inherited it, right? That's the very basics of a will. Everybody should have really for 3 reasons. A, if you don't have one, you're allowing the state to define who is a spouse, who is a child, and those definitions change, right? Like if it acts like a duck and quacks like a duck, it might not be your stepchild, right? So that's the first part. The second part is that if you don't have a will, you're really just allowing other people to decide how your fortune is set up. With a trust, I grew up in a time where people said, trusts are for rich people and we don't need a trust. And I'm trying to break that barrier and understanding. And I'm trying to say trusts are really for people who are smart. And the reason being is because if you take that same backpack example, what you're actually doing is you're coming into my office and you're saying, hey, I've got the backpack on my back. Let me go ahead and create a new bag. I'd like to work with you to create a new bag that's not attached to my back. And we create a bag and we call this the trust bag. And you say this bag doesn't belong. We're creating it with the intention that this actually belongs to my children. And I'm gifting it to them right now. At creation, it's there. Now, because you've gifted it to them now, even though the bag is empty, that's no longer your property, for lack of a better way to explain it. You are the carrier of the bag. You can open and close the bag. You can manipulate the bag while you're alive. But that bag has now been given to your kids at a very young age, right? So what you do then is you take stuff out of your bag. You take your house, you take your bank accounts, you take everything and you take it out of the bag that's permanently attached to you and you put it in the bag for your kids. You then are allowed to basically say, hey, we've got this backpack now, I'm carrying it for my kids. When you die, when something happens to you, you set instructions, that bag now belongs to your kids. There's no probate. There's no going to the courthouse because you've already gifted it to them prior to death. So they just get it. They don't pay inheritance taxes. If you end up getting sued for your business, again, they can only sue your bag, the thing that belong to you. Everything that's separate, that's in the trust bag, is not touchable. So it gets a lot of like liability protection. It does a lot of asset protection. And then for those of us who have young kids, at least for my benefit, when you set up a trust, you can set up parameters on how people get your stuff when you die. So for example, my trust says that my kids are very young. If I die before they turn 18, they get 20% of my wealth to be used towards food, shelter, the good stuff, right? From 18 to 25, they get an additional 20% for education. And then if they don't want to have an education, that's fine. They're just not getting that wealth. And then from 25 to 35, I've set up that each of my children can get 20% of whatever's in the trust to be used to purchase a home. It does not have to be their primary home. It could be an investment property. But I have parameters that they have to qualify for the purchase themselves without touching any of the money in the trust. So what I've basically set them up for is if I die right now and they're 6, I've now carried out what my net worth is over the course of 25 years of their life to have support. And it's set with parameters that I've set in place today. So it's a very smart way to making sure that your family is protected. while also for those of us who are doing investments, while we're alive, we're making sure that the things that we are creating, like our houses and our bank accounts, are in this trust and it's not touchable in a lawsuit. And then as you age, last thing, Mike, as you age, if you need to qualify for Medicare or Medicaid or anything like that, they can only base it off your income and your assets within your bag. And if you've put everything into the trust bag, all of a sudden, as you age, you start qualifying for government benefits. And I've had some people ask me, well, why would I want to qualify? And my question is, why would you not set yourself up to be able to qualify if you can? The only parameters with that is there's a 5-year look back period. So you have to create the trust far enough or far back enough to cover that 5-year look back period. So that's my quick spiel on trusts and wills.
So basically you're saying with that look back period, you can't just say like, hey, I just got a terminal diagnosis. I'm going to put everything in that real quick and then move everything over to my kids so that I can show like I have lower assets and then I guess avoid any sort of taxes at what is presumed to be soon to be death. Is that correct?
So so the look back period really is for Medicaid and Medicare. So if you're not worried about that, putting in a trust prior to death is very economical for your kids because you're essentially putting it in a way that they would avoid probate. And if you know you're about to pass away, it's a great way to do it.
So
I have a follow-up.
Go ahead, Ty.
So you mentioned something as far as asset protection goes, and then a lot of people that are in the real estate investing space will form LLCs because they believe that it gives them a similar type of protection. But from what I've heard, a lot of the times the corporate veil is pierced, and then any type of protection that you would be allowed is gone. Do you think that forming a trust like this is a superior way than forming an LLC, or are they different, or is it different types of protection?
So I have both, and I usually recommend you do both. And there's a reason for it because I own 7 businesses. I'm very good at what I do. And that's not just, being full of myself. I genuinely am very good at what I do. And I'm convinced that if you sue me and you try to pierce corporate veil, you will be able to do it. And that should tell you that that's not because that's not what I'm good at. It's just because it's very easy to pierce the corporate veil. I think piercing the corporate veil as a whole is a great idea. But it's much easier to pierce the corporate veil for a smaller one-time, like one-person LLC than it is for a multi-stock company that has like so many checks and balances. It's the idea really is that you're running yourself like a business, and the smaller you are, the easier it is to break corporate veil. I mean, the number one example I think I've said to other people is, imagine that you have an investment property, right? Like maybe you have an investment property in Ocean City and there's an emergency and one of your tenants is calling you and you happen to be on vacation yourself. So you send a handyman there that you never worked with. Handyman fixes you, you're on vacation, he starts calling you, he wants to get paid the $130 or whatever it was to fix the issue. And you're like, all right, sure, I'm going to Venmo you right now. Thanks so much for going to go out there and fix it. And he doesn't take Venmo and he takes Cash App. And let's just say Cash App is tied to your personal account and not your business account. And you don't have time to like move around funds and you're on vacation. So you Cash App this guy $130 and that $130 now pierce that corporate veil because you just first money to pay off a business expense. And yes, there's ways to fix that, right? There's accounting, there's CPA, there's ways to like account for that. Most same people don't have good operating agreements that go over how do you handle that. So it is very easy if I want to squeeze somebody to pierce that corporate veil. Take the corporate veil, I set it up for your business so that in the offense, like if you get sued, the LLC goes first. And then if we happen to pierce corporate veil, your bag is still empty, there's nothing else in there. So you have a trust and now you've basically protected yourself from a 2-tier example.
The way it was explained to me for trust versus a will is that if you have a trust, you get taking the bag and you're handing it to your offspring, your kids, your wife, versus a will, you're putting the bag on the ground and then you're paying somebody to pick the bag up and hand it to your kids. So there's a middleman that you have to pay to get the stuff that's family owed or family, owned is the best way to put it. So like my house, I can't just give it to my son. I have to go through a lawyer in a will for him to basically sue to open up my will. Then the information on the will is going to then dictate where the money goes or the housing goes or whatever. Is that pretty much accurate?
Yeah, You got it. And then, there's other factors that we always consider is a will is only effective after you have passed away. Which I know sounds like a silly statement, but a trust doesn't have to be, right? So my trust says that if two physicians find that I'm not capable of making decisions, whatever that could be, it could be that I'm sick, it could be that I'm on life support, it could be whatever it is, there's a secondary person named in my trust that picks up the bag and continues my life, meaning that they can go into a bank and pay my bills. They can pay my mortgage. It's basically allows somebody else to pick up the bag if I'm not able to, even when I'm alive. And I have parameters in there on what they can do if I am alive, right? It says things like, I'd like to age at home, but not if you're going to spend more than 30% of whatever my wealth is. So now when I'm in my 30s, I basically said 30% is the max I want to use to age at home. And then you put me in retirement home, right? Like those are things that I have set in place so that I have kids to do what's best for me and not to my kids to do what I want in my 80s. Or my 30s, depending on the situation.
There's also a thing called, my wife she did palliative care up until this past year when our son was born. And the cost for end of life care is significant. I think we were in a assisted living facility about a month or so ago, and it was one of the very high end ones in DC. And the average cost, she said, was between $20,000 and $25,000 per month. Now, I also have somebody else I know who's paying $16,000 a month. Now, it also depends on your level of care, like if you have dementia or you have to have special needs, you have to be, taken care of to a specific standard. But that's a very, very big expense that most people don't account for going into the end of their life. So these are good things to kind of go over now before we have to think about it. But I do want to take 15 steps back because your beginning of your story is kind of like the sweetheart American story. Your family is originally from Bulgaria. I want to kind of give a background of who you are and kind of build you up as a person. Your family is from Bulgaria. You guys moved here when you were a young kid, and you kind of took the bull by its horns when you were late teens, early 20s. Can you walk me through how you got into all of this realm? Because it's kind of a cool story.
Yeah. So we moved here when I was 8 or 9 from Bulgaria. My parents, typical story that you probably hear all the time, right? My parents were really uber rich in Bulgaria, really well off. They moved here and they had nothing because America drains money like crazy. So within like a couple years, we were piss poor broke, and I was living in a great community because my parents wanted us to have the best education and they wanted us to have everything we could, but I grew up with nothing and kind of made do. And then in my 20s, my mom, she did some things right, obviously. She has a surgeon and a lawyer for kids. But in my 20s, it was just sort of like I had nothing and I had to go to law school. Those were my options. Ended up applying for law after I worked at like Domino's Pizza for quite some time. And it was just, let me apply to work at a law firm while I wait to go to law school. And it was a short sale negotiation company, and they had about 80 short sales actively. And this was like 2009, 2010, when short sales were a thing. And within 1 year, I put off law school because we went from 80 short sales to like 8,000 short sales. And I was heading up that entire office. I ended up getting hired by these two guys that were in real estate. And, it's a double-edged sword because looking back, they like really made more money available to me than I'd ever had in my life. And I realized how capable I was at a lot of people in real estate. But then now looking back in my 30s, looking back to that, and I was like, they were also making a shitload of money and not paying me enough for what I was doing, right? It's like that. It's that double-edged sword that now has kind of led me to this part where I am. I went to law school. I got into real estate. I was business partners for them for a while. And then I kind of realized that when you're working for somebody else, as much as they respected me and they took care of me and they did everything for me, they were still making quite a lot of money off of my back because I was very capable. So I kind of formed this law firm with the idea of anybody can do it, right? You don't need a law degree. You need a law degree if you're going to be a lawyer. But I think we all kind of were told growing up, you need to have a degree to be successful. And that's just not true. So I just kind of took everything I've done in the last 10 years and all the mistakes I've made and all my fuck ups. And I'm like, let me form a law firm that's more human, right? It's not as big of a deal for you to call a lawyer and say, hey, I'm starting a business. I don't know what I'm doing. If that lawyer is going to say, hey, listen, I've got all these vertical integrated companies. If you're going into real estate, I'd love for you to give me a try for title or give me a try for this. And I'm happy to walk you through the beginning stages because the beginning stages are the most expensive to get proper legal care. And then it's too late once you've screwed up, right? At that point, then you're like, how do I get out of this mess? So I formed a law firm with that idea of just let me help others grow their own wealth and grow their ability to invest and do real estate so that it is not a traditional 9 to 5 and helping people chase what they want to do. So
how long have you been practicing?
about 10 years, give or take.
Okay. Yeah. So now I'm trying to think, we took 15 steps back. Now I'm trying to get back to like 12 more ahead. So I'm trying to figure out where we were or where we want to pick up after that. But no, that's a really cool success story. Like, and it's just like a good reminder, like there's so much opportunity out there, like regardless of where you come from or what your background is. Like that's pretty cool. So
a pivot step for me, I think, was a couple of years ago because I was doing all this real estate stuff. And that's when I started getting to trusts and wills and all that because my mom actually got really sick. So my daughter is now 2. I had given birth to my daughter, and like a week later, my mom got really sick and she ended up in the ICU pretty quickly. She went to Cancun. She came back. I got a phone call. Like it was day 1. She wasn't feeling well. We thought it was COVID. By day 3, I knew she had to go to the hospital. She collapsed at home, wasn't able to get off the floor. So I called some EMTs. My mom refused care. So they left her on the floor and left. So like 4 or 5 hours later, again, mind you, my brother's a surgeon, his wife's a surgeon. So we knew something was really wrong. I called the EMTs again, and they were again refusing to take my mom. And at that point, her leg was like 5 times the size of her body. And I was on FaceTime, and my brother was, and he was like, you need to take her. She does not have dementia, and she has dementia-like symptoms. You need to take her. And the guy said, I can't. Like, she's refusing care.
So your mom was refusing transport.
Yeah.
The EMTs were not refusing to take her, correct? That could be a big deal.
Yeah, she was refusing to be taken, and they were saying we can't take her against her wish. So I flat out lied on FaceTime, and I was, I'm her boy. And the guy knew I was lying.
Good enough for me.
He knew I was lying.
Say it again. How'd you bypass that?
I just said I was a power of attorney.
That's a great. Let's put a pin in that. Power of attorney, and I have the right to make decisions for my mom.
She used of real quietly. She just said power attorney. I'm a power attorney.
Yeah. And then he was like, well, do you have proof of that? We're on FaceTime, mind you. And my mom is like dying on the floor. Like there was nobody there. And I was like, look, you've got her son on the phone. You got, my husband's next to me. My sister-in-law, my dad was there. I was like, there is nobody who's going to contest me saying I'm a power of attorney. This is it. Everybody else is in Bulgaria. Like you're not getting arguments from the entire family. They're all going to sit here and tell you I'm her power of attorney. So
that's what sucks though, is like, no matter, like I can tell somebody, you need to go to the hospital. Listen to me. You are not in good shape. And they can say, no, I'm fine. And I can't make them go. And it's like, my hands are now tied. I can call anybody I want to, battalion chief. I can call a medical director. And like, well, they said they don't want to go. They have sound capacity of mind. Then I don't have an option. It's like, come on, man.
Yep. Well, they took her. They took her, and she went fighting. Like she was screaming and grabbing things, and they took her. And the next morning we got a phone call, and it was a septic shock, multiple organ failure, ICU. They told us she probably had like a day left to live. And we started saying our goodbyes. It was a whole thing. And this was on a Thursday, and she was not of sound mind. And Saturday, a fellow came to us and said that he didn't agree with the ICU we were in. And he said, I think that your mom has a chance to live, but it will not be at this hospital. So he told me that we need to get her flown to shock trauma. And I took out $5,000 out of my bank account, and I went to a nurse ICU field, and I said, you're going to watch and witness my mom sign a bunch of documents, and we're going to forge them. And she looked at me and she was like, what do you mean? And I was like, I'm either going to be in jail by tomorrow, or my mom is not going to be in this hospital. Those are the two options. So you might as well take the money, because I'm just going to take it to anybody else. So very long and short, she was in shock trauma the next morning, because I had my mom sign a power of attorney, advance directive. I had her sign all of the documents you could possibly imagine. None of them were valid. She was not capable of signing anything. And this was like Sunday morning, British trauma. It was Super Bowl Sunday. I get a phone call at like 6 p.m, and it's a surgeon. My mom's wailing in the background. And they said, she has necrotizing fasciitis, which for those of you not familiar is a flesh-eating, skin-eating bacteria. and it had traveled from the water in Cancun all the way up her upper thigh from her ankle. So they said that they need to basically go in there and remove all the skin that's infected. And they said with the extent of how bad it was, they thought that they would not be able to save her leg. And they were like, you have to pick right now, amputation or death. Those are your choices. Which one would you want to do if you have to pick? And there I am holding my daughter, and I said, amputate her leg, right? Like, I was just like, amputate her leg. If that's the choice, amputate her leg. And I hung up, called my brother, and I said, you know, if she survives this and they take her leg, she will never speak to me again. I know without doubt that she would not have wanted to lose her leg. And that was day one of another 12 surgeries came after that. And she was in ICU on life support for several months. She went to acute, subacute care. She didn't lose her leg, but, you know, it was multiple surgeries where we didn't know the impact it would have. She had to learn how to re-walk. She had skin grafts. She had a, you know, ICU delirium, huge personality shift. And in that time frame, you know, I sort of had to handle everything for her. And that's when I started doing estate planning. I used to look at it as a financial benefit, but now I think about it like, I grieved my mom so much, and I had a newborn, and nobody cared what my life was like, right? Like, all of a sudden I had to take care of my mom. And my dad, who is 80 and she was his primary caretaker, he's half blind, can't hear, doesn't drive. A week after she'd gone into the ICU, he called me and he asked me to pick up some potatoes and bring them to his house. And I had this realization that he had no food in the house. And I hadn't even thought about that, right? So I use this story to kind of talk about the fact that it's not just finances. Trusts are very beneficial for finances. If my mom had had her stuff in order, there would have been a lot of things that I wouldn't have had to make. And you'll notice I didn't, you know, she didn't lose her leg. But when I tell this story, I wait to say that because I'm like, that little weight of you trying to figure out if she lost her leg is just a blimp of like what decisions I had to make. And if you're a supporter, you're allowing your family to make those decisions for you. And those are horrible decisions to have to make. And they're even worse if we're, you know, it's the height of a pandemic and there's a formula shortage and my daughter had a hole in her heart and she had specific formula she needed and I had to stop breastfeeding because I was at the ICU. So it's a lot of things that timing doesn't really care for you.
I'm glad you kind of brought that up, kind of made you like humanizes the whole thing. Like, yeah, lawyers get a bad rap, but like this makes you a person to everybody else. And I think most people who are going to listen to this can be first responders, and there will be the cops and the firefighters and the nurses and the doctors that are in the group. And they know, like, I can relate to this. I understand this. I've seen this before. And it's tough. I mean, it's the end of life care is a really rough, bumpy road to be in because it's like, what's the right decision? So if you have an advance directive in place, which anybody can go out and get their 5 wishes or get their advance directive done, they'll kind of direct you on what kind of decisions would my mom want me to make. Well, here on this paper right here, it says, you know, this is what they want me to decide for them. Like some people want, you know, CPR, some people want passive, some people want their organs donated, some people don't. Like it just depends on who you are. And like a lot of people, they don't ever have these conversations with their loved ones because it's just a kind of a faux pas topic that there's just like, we don't bring this up because it's too morbid and dark. Well, it's part of life. And I think as we have evolved as a society, we've gotten away from death. Like we don't see death on a regular basis unless you are some type of first responder or work in the medical field. So this is kind of a gray area for people to have a discussion. And it's good that you're bringing it up because this is an important part of our relationship with our families and what you do for a living. And what we do for a living kind of brings everything together. So I don't want to blow over that too much. Do you want to talk about any of that? Like what made it easier if it was in place? Do you want to talk about the 5 wishes? Do you want to talk about the end of life care? Do you want to talk about any of that stuff to kind of lead into the trust and the LLCs and what you do?
So, I mean, you know, the truth of the matter is that everyone that sits in my office sits there and they say, well, I don't really care what any of this says, right? Like we have a burial preference sheet that's 7 pages long and talk for some nonsense, like what music do you want played during your grave, you know, during your burial. And everybody looks at me and is like, I don't care. And I'm like, it's not for you. It isn't. You know, my mom didn't pass away, but I grieved her many times. And I remember at one point, you know, I decided to get her from Target because she was in the ICU for several months and those blankets suck. So I remember I was at Target and I was just, at a certain point, I realized I spent like 45 minutes trying to pick a color and fabric for this stupid blanket that had no meaning whatsoever. And that's a realization that I had, that I was like, I'm not really with it right now. Like, I'm very an educated person. I'm very factual, but when it's happening to you, you can't separate that emotion. So whether if you're one of the people who is considered like, doing a trust or wealth building, you should do it 100%. But if you don't have these sorts of conversations or you don't have it written down, you're not doing a favor to anybody else cares for you, because ultimately the facts show that if you die with no plans in place, your family will take 6 to 7 months to figure out your life. And then in 6 to 7 months after you've passed, when everybody has forgotten that their mom or dad died and they've forgotten that this person was grieving, one day your kids are going to be sitting at home and now all of a sudden they have nothing left to do. And that's when grief will set in, because for the first time in 6, 7 months, they now have to start making decisions or caring for the stuff that you left behind. So they're all important, right? The 5 wishes are important. Your burial preferences are important. And they're not really important to you. They're important for the people you love.
This morning, I was driving home from where I did a standby till like 10 a.m. this morning. So I was at work for a while. So one of the retired battalion chief's wives called me and was like, hey, I want to pick your brain about real estate. I was like, in my mind, I'm like, all right, cool. This is going to be like, how do I invest? Where do I put money at? Blah, blah, blah. She's like, no, it's, she's like, my dad passed away. The house is in disrepair. We don't have the time, the energy, the money to fix it. I was given your number by so-and-so. What do we do? I was like, oh, there's a whole can of worms here. Like, do you want to make it a rental? Do you want to buy it? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to put it in your name? Is mom still alive? What's she going to do? Is she go to assisted living? And like kind of having these things in place and having these things thought out before it becomes an issue, like a pre-plan. Like anything we do is pre-planned. It's like, if we go to this building, we're going to do this, this, and this. If this happens, we're going to react this way. And having the pre-plan in place is just going to make a world of difference. The only thing I've never really heard anything bad about trust except for 2 things. One, the cost, because it's a chunk of change. You're looking starting at a couple $1,000s. But if I put $5,000 into it now in my 30s, 40s, 50s, it's going to pay in dividends in my 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I doubt I'll make it to 100, but fingers crossed if everything works still. And then the other thing I heard was a drawback is if I put all of my holdings in real estate into a trust, it's harder for me to get approved as an investor to buy more properties because the trust is showing the income, not my personal income. So what are your thoughts on those?
So I actually, for most of my investors, I don't put your investment properties in trusts. I actually leave them in your LLC. And I do a succession plan on the back end that shows the LLC is owned by the trust. So that way, as long as you're getting, investing and you're doing loans based on your LLC, then you're good to go. The, refinancing on your primary mortgage, like your primary home is going to go in trust and all the investment stuff is going to go in the LLC. So your primary home, if you put it in a trust, refinancing is the only pain in the butt because you have to put it back in your personal name, refinance, and then back in the trust. But if you're working with somebody who's experienced, it should be seamless. I think a lot of the downfall of the trust really is the fact that you get a lot of people who don't know how to use them or work with them.
So trusts are confusing. I mean, I've tried to put some mental thought into it. The 2 pieces of atoms I have left in my brain to rub together to try to figure these out. But it's not firing. So like I just put a quick list together and bear with me while I say it's a revocable trust, special needs trust, charitable, testamentary, irrevocable, generation skipping, joints, qualified residence trust, grantor, blah, 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 all the way down to a pet trustee.
Yep.
How do I, as a layman, as just a typical Joe Blow fireman, like how do I know which trust to focus on? Do I go to you? Do I talk to guys at the firehouse, which is always a terrible idea? Like, oh yeah, man, put your trust in it.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, my uncle did it this way. You don't want to do it. Yeah, definitely not at the kitchen table. This is definitely an attorney type conversation, I would say.
Yeah. So most of the time for most of what you need is a revocable trust. So if we were to talk about that backpack, right? the backpack is the best example. Revocable trust essentially means all your stuff's in that bag, but you can open and close the bag while you're alive. You can do whatever you want with it. You have full ownership. An irrevocable trust is your bag can be open and closed when you put the stuff in it, and you write yourself a contract that tells you what you can do with the bag. You cannot change the rules once they're created. So some people think an irrevocable trust is a trust that I can't sell the house or I can't do X with the house. It's really the term of the contract are created at time of the trust, and you can't change it later. So if you put in, I can sell a house from an irrevocable trust, you can still sell the house. It just, you're basically closing that bag with the instructions set, and you can only do things following the instruction set.
Why would you choose an irrevocable then? Because I feel like if you make decisions, you write this contract right now when your kids are 6. Well, obviously things change, life changes. You're going to want to probably make some tweaks to it. So why wouldn't you set it up as a revocable right from the get-go?
A lot of businesses, like business partners, will create irrevocable trust for investment properties. So they'll do like something where their LLCs go in an irrevocable trust. So that way neither side can change it. The other one is for Medicaid planning. Some of people who are just solely focusing on Medicaid, the IRS is also smart, right? So if they're going to give you government benefits, they want to make sure that when you created a trust, you didn't do it just with the intention to emit taxes. So really, if you're Medicaid planning, if you're like, 55, 60, you're starting to think about what is it going to be like when I'm 80, you may want to consider switching to an irrevocable one. Really, prior to that, a revocable one is going to give you all the benefits you need.
Is this why you see like really wealthy families, they'll have like the Heinz Foundation Trust?
Yeah.
So they put all this money in that trust, but then like magically half their kids work for the trust and probably make $300,000 a year. Is that
correct? Yeah.
Yeah. The jet fuel gets paid for the Gulfstream out of the trust.
Out of the trust, right. So remember that when you die, everything in your will, everything in your probate proceeding is public. I can literally Google anybody in the country that has died. And if they have a will or probate proceeding, I can tell you there is a list of inventory of things they died with. If you have a trust, it's 100% private. So
that brings us to, so I met you through Faisal Morsi, right? We had him on here podcast, I think at the end of December, and he does data pulls from all over. So he can get probate, divorce, tax liens, whatever it might be. And like, that's one of the lists he can pull is probate. And some people who know probate, they focus on probate because they know it so well. So like, so from how do I say this? I'm not gonna turn this right. What would you say is a big benefiting factor of having your stuff hidden versus not, trust versus will?
So one of the biggest things is you don't know what's going to happen to you or your kids, right? So if you have some sort of credit or you have liabilities, a lot of people can know what you left your kids behind. So people are a lot more likely to collect, right? If they know that your kids now inherited. The second part is if you have any kids that are special needs. If you die with a will, you're automatically saying they're now going to qualify for a bunch of things because you've just given them a nice chunk of change, right? So this is a big concern for special needs, because if you have a special needs child that maybe will not be able to have a normal 9-to-5 job, right? Maybe they're very gifted and they'll be able to uphold a lot of stuff, but you're worried about their ability to provide in their 50s and 60s. And you build all this wealth and you build all this stuff, but you leave it in a will. You're essentially now not only making public knowledge that you've left somebody who needs that money, X amount that they're going to pay taxes on, but also you've now disqualified them from lots of benefits that the government is supposed to provide for people in that particular need. So by keeping it private, you're making sure lien holders don't know. You're making sure your life is private, but then you're also making sure that if things are left behind, they don't all of a sudden count as income to somebody who didn't do anything for it and they're disqualified for whatever they need in their life.
That's also something that happens a lot when we're refinancing. Underwriters will ask for a copy of the entire trust. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. The whole purpose of the trust is so you can't see anything. So we usually provide a certificate of trust, which should satisfy any of the requirements. It's always funny, though. They always want to see the trust. And I'm like, literally the whole purpose of this thing being created is so people can't see what's inside the trust.
And the certificate of trust really should be covered. But then the other thing is everybody on this podcast probably is an investor at some point or another, and you write, Faisal's little lists. if you die with a trust, you're not getting into probate. So knowing phone calls from investors. There's also a lot of, you're not going to really, it's very rare that we all die together, right? Like you're not dying with your spouse at the same time. So the issue is that if you leave a spouse behind and you die with a will, leaving someone in their 80s or 70s vulnerable to a lot of these kind of people who are going to see, hey, her husband died. She doesn't know what she's doing. She just inherited X amount of money. It's public record. And all of a sudden her phone is blowing up. My dad is 80 something. And the other day I walked in on him and he was sitting there putting in his credit card number and he was holding his phone. What are you doing? And he's like, at the bank, they want me to put my card number in to verify something. My dad's very intelligent, right? And I'm sitting there like, that's a scam. That's a scam. Hang up. So, keeping it private just allows a lot more the vulnerability aspect, knowing aspect, and also, from a standpoint of privacy for me, I never really thought privacy was that important. In the last, year or 2 years, you guys have probably seen my social media. I'm doing news coverage. I have a lot of people that I sue. And now all of a sudden, you'll notice that my social media has started taking my kids off, right? Like I told my staff, take pictures of my kids off because I'm dealing with a lot of weirdos. I'm successful and it's great. But there's this idea now where I'm like, well, I don't really want anybody to know my kids go to this school because being a public figure also makes people look you up just for shits and giggles. I won an eviction case the other day and I don't think I did anything wrong representing the landlord. He hadn't paid rent in like 3 years. Anyway, we won and I walked out and he sent me a text message that's basically said he was going to murder me and my entire family. And I looked at it like, wow.
Should have paid your rent.
Yeah. Like, okay, let me take this to the police and have you rearrested now, dickhead.
I did. I did. Peace order was my next step.
People never cease to amaze me. It's funny because I'm in DC, right? So we have a lot of like Congress and Senate and crazies and people lighting themselves on fire and like all types of fucking wild shit. So people are getting skip traced in DC all the time. And it's like AOC, I know that I think she's an absolute moron. No, I'm sorry. She's the smartest bartender I've ever met. But like people were skip tracing her to see where she lived at and to stalk her. And it became an issue because it was right down the street from the firehouse from 7 Engine. And I was like, oh my God, like I know exactly. Somebody was like, oh yeah, she lives over at this building. I'm like, how the fuck did you find that? He's like, oh man, somebody posted it on Twitter or whatever. I'm like, what's wrong with you guys? Like, why? Like she's an idiot, but I don't care that much about her. Jesus.
Right.
But it's like everybody's vulnerable. There's free sites out there you can go on and skip trace people and find out who their name, what their name is, what their birthday is, what their address is, where they lived at, who they're related to, what their phone number was back, what their AOL Instant Messenger was back in 1993. Like a lot of information is out there in the web, and it's like, wow, you're actually really vulnerable. And those are the free sites.
Right. Yeah.
So
and I'm gonna pick on Mike for a second because one of my clients that I guess called me was like, hey, I think you're going to be on my son's podcast. Wanted to hire me for something and he wanted to do a collections case. And, we had a scheduled phone call and he was like, you're doing a judgment. Here's what I could find about him. All it took me is 30 seconds to like put this person's information in and I had all sorts of information. And this client of mine was like, wow, you've really done your homework. And I was like, all I did was type his name into like a record search that lawyers have access to. Like I could tell you what like car he was driving.
Yeah, I was obviously I've talked about that, I think briefly here, but is that the same database like law enforcement pulls from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was able to find some info, but you obviously found a little bit more. So that was helpful.
Yeah. I impressed them though. I'll just say that.
That's good.
Let's talk about some other things that you do that you're for the good guys. Like, so obviously we brought this up last conversation was you offer people for money owed. So if somebody didn't pay their rent for X amount of months, you basically put tell me how it works out for you. Cause just walk me through this. I didn't have somebody pay me.
Okay. So I do, real estate living. So really my start is really, if you are investing in a property, you got ground rent issues, HOA issues, whatever it is, if it involves a house or real estate got you, but landlord tenant law is something that we handle and we handle the collections thereafter. the problem I see is a lot of property managers are like, oh, I use Appfolio. And Appfolio allows me to do a collections case. And they send it to a collections company. And all the collections company does is check on them every couple months. What I do is I actually do the legal route, which is if somebody moves out of your property and they owe you back rent, is I sue them for it. I sue them for a breach of contract. And I'm like, hey, they owe XYZ amount of months of, rent, and they owe it. And get a rent, and then we do wage garnishment. And then, it's like a 2-year process where we basically can get a certain amount of their wages once they have a stable job. And it's not necessarily always when they move out of your property. But we can do this for contracting. We can do it for pretty much any breach of contract. It doesn't really have to be landlord-tenant issues. Just be mindful that if it's in Maryland and you want to collect rent, you have to have a rental license. You can't collect past rent if you have a rental license at that time. For the counties that require it, at least.
So what's the other way to garnish wages? Not wages, it's your tax refund. You can garnish tax refund too, correct?
Yep, tax refund. And you can even put a hold on bank accounts. Depending on the situation, you can actually do a whole hold on a bank account. And I've already shared that financially my parents weren't better off. So I can just tell you that if you garnish a bank account, my mom just opened another one. So I don't think that one's as lucidly great. But the tax returns is a big one. Wage garnishment is a big one. And a lot of people, I think, don't react as well to a collection company as they do to an attorney because they get very intimidated just by my letterhead, because it's more just a collections company who outsources to the Philippines and calls you every couple months.
So we'll say this. So I ran a place for Mike in Maryland, up in Hagerstown somewhere, and I decided that I wasn't going to pay rent anymore. It took 6 months to kick me out. Mike files the paperwork. He goes to court. He gets the judgment that either I'm a holdover tenant or I'm in breach of contract. And then what does Mike do, or what do I do from there to contact you, and what's the next steps?
So if you're going to do a failure to pay rent or like a tenant holdover or anything, remember you can ask the judge to give you a monetary judgment at time of eviction. But to do that, you have to serve them, right? So failure to pay rent, most of those in Maryland, you could just notice on the door, hey, we're evicting you. But if you do that, you can't get the judgment. In both cases, you just call me and you say, hey, this person owes me XYZ. We usually take anywhere between $250 and $300 up front, and that's our startup fee to do all the collections. If you've got the judgment already from the failure to pay rent, the judge actually gave it to you, we're skipping straight on to wage garnishment. And so there's a form, you send it to them and you say, hey, we're going to garnish your wages. Here's a judgment. You need to fill this out. You have 30 days. If they refuse, then we take the next steps after that. But if you don't get that judgment up front with the failure to pay or the tenant holdover, our first step is to really file a contract claim to say that you violated the contract to get that money judgment.
Do you do that in West Virginia also, or just
No,
Maryland?
Unfortunately, just Maryland.
Okay.
I might need you in Delaware in a year or so.
Do you guys, Mike and Aaron, do you guys actually pursue and go after judgments? I'm just asking because I had one in Idaho this last month and I decided not to do it. I figured if they can't pay my rent, what is the likelihood of me ever recovering any of the costs? And then I guess after they answer, maybe Diana, how often are you successful in doing that?
You have to remember that once you get the judgment, it's 12 years you collect on. So I think a lot of people are looking at this as an immediate buyout, but it's really not that, right? When you pay me that $200, it's a long front for you, but it's really a 12-year judgment you've now got that then you can also renew for another 12 years. And then you can also 1099 debt. So some people will do a judgment every single time, hold on to it, and in 12 years, if they have seen no payment, then they'll do a 1099 as a loss for their taxes. So it's worth it because it's just because they can't pay your rent right now doesn't mean they're not going to have their shit together in 13 years from now. I mean, they might not, but there's really no reason to not try, depending on the value.
Yeah. And honestly, it's like the old, you can't get blood from a turnip, but you can make their life somewhat of a pain in the ass for a long time by doing that, right?
Right.
Yeah. So to answer your question, Tyler, I don't really go after, basically I take whatever the security deposit is, obviously, but there's been very few times where I've been like, is it really financially even going to be worth it for me to pursue this? Or just basically accept it as a cost of doing business and move on. The one she's referring to was a straight up contract violation where in essence it was theft and I had already got the judgment against the contractor. So that's a little bit different than landlord-tenant dispute.
Yeah, for me, the first person I've had to not pay was the recent eviction, and I think I posted about it on the group a couple of times, where the guy was sleeping on dead rats, and it was just an absolute mess of a house. So I had to re-renovate the whole house. So I haven't yet, and it's just because I've got too much on my plate. It's something that I need to have a sidebar with Diana about. I think she sent me. I think that was the request for the payment was for that, is what I'm guessing now, looking back at it in hindsight. So yes, I am going to pursue it, but it's more because you owe me over $10,000 and did over $10,000 in damage. So at this point, like, is it $300 worth it for me to, or $350 worth it for me to go after him? And hopefully I'll get some of it back in the next 12 years, then yes. But this is the first time I've had to deal with it. But a lot of times, like, I know in this area, it's very liberal, we'll say. So like a lot of times it's hard to get a judgment against people because they file whatever claims or hardships or whatever. So like this property specifically, it's 3 houses on one lot. So the other houses carry the cost of the property. Now, that being said, he didn't pay for 10 months, so I didn't get the income coming in. But that was I purchased that as a foreclosure auction, but they filed I think it was chapter 11, chapter 12, a hardship. It was a 7-year eviction for me to buy it from the person I bought it from. So like some people are professionals and know the game at this, which is why you have to hire somebody like lawyer Diana Khan, because she knows the ins and outs and what she can and can't do. Whereas I'm like, okay, so he filed for bankruptcy. What's that mean for me? Whereas she already knows the answer to this. So yes, I am going to pursue it.
No reason why it should take 7 years to get somebody out of a piece of property you own.
No.
That's where you should be able to just show up, change the locks. All right, utilities are shut off. Get out. Like,
yeah.
that's why I like storage.
You can probably co-sign, like Baltimore and PG County are probably the two worst places to evict in Maryland.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I get more deals out of Baltimore City and Prince George's County than I do in any other county in the state for evictions.
Goddamn,
it's frustrating. Landlording is a full contact sport.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm sure you guys are going to start seeing this kind of coming your way as well, because in Baltimore City, what they're doing now is it's like all the tenants, I think the professional tenants have had a meeting, and we just weren't part of it, because in the last like 3 months, we've seen a spike of people breaking leases, not paying, not being current. They move out, the landlord keeps a security deposit, and then all of a sudden you're hearing some sort of argument. The tenants are filing lawsuits against landlords for 3 times the security deposit because they didn't get proper notice for the security deposit, or they're like the notice was like 1 day off. It's like this new thing I've seen across the board. I'm currently representing.
That's the kind of stuff that makes you want to just take a hammer to kneecaps. Like, it's the professional tenants union. You know, they get together, they discuss what they're going to do, and it's like it's sad that you even have to worry about stuff like that, but it's true. Like, I don't even get me started on this. We don't have time to discuss it. I can't crack a beer just yet. So, but tenants, you know, I always wonder, like when I started as a landlord, I was like, you know, I didn't want a lot of confrontation. Like let's try and make it work. Now I'm just like, here's the deal. I provide a safe place. You pay the rent. You pay it on time. We're going to be okay. You know, but somewhere along the line, they get the idea like, oh, I don't have to pay rent, or I don't have to pay it on time, or I'm going to pay half of it. Like, no, you broke your side of the deal. We're done. But anyway.
Diana,
I was going to say, just funny, because we had a tenant call over the weekend, like to our law firm, and I have a VA in the Philippines. She picks up the phones on the weekends. And she's like, I've got such and such on the phone, and she really wants to talk to you, and she hasn't been paying her rent for the last 2 years, and she lives in the basement. I guess the landlord's trying to evict her, and she has nowhere to go, and she was crying on the phone. Can you please call her? It sounded urgent. And I was sitting there like, no, not going to call her. She hasn't paid her rent in 2 years. Like, there's nothing that she can say to me that's going to make me want to side with her. And, you know, my VA is like, well, what do you mean? Like, she's so sad. She hasn't go. And I'm like, well, I believe in this very simple concept: pay to stay. You want to stay, you pay. Like, it's just that simple.
So let me ask you a question. So you're licensed in Maryland and Virginia, right? I know DC is probably the pain in the butt. So what is different from state to state? Like, obviously what we're doing in Maryland and Delaware and West Virginia and California and Boise, Idaho, which is where we have most of our holdings. What's so different about state to state taxes? Like, why is one place better than the next place to own real estate in your realm?
So it's mostly about which states are more friendly, right? They're more friendly to like multi-nets. They're more friendly to taxing or like business. So if you get sued, there's certain states that are just more friendly to businesses. So if you get sued, it's not, you got to hand over all your bank accounts and you can't use it. So we're more focused on what happens in worst case scenarios. And those states, you're looking at more of a business friendly environment, which means that you're not going to get completely effed. If somebody sues you, you're not going to like have a complete shutdown of your entire business. And they make the litigation process a bit smoother. You know, in Maryland, for example, they're not as smooth. So if you're an LLC holder in Maryland and you get sued, you legally cannot walk into the courthouse without an attorney. You have to have an attorney represent you. So as a lawyer, when I see like an investor that I sue aside because I think they did something wrong, the moment I see it's an LLC, I'm like, well, let's just sue them in court because they're going to have to hire a lawyer. They can't represent themselves. And all of a sudden, they're looking for a settlement because they know that attorney is going to cost the same amount. So it's just that. It's just what's business friendly and what's not.
So friendly, I like when people say friendly. It helps show like, are they tenant friendly where they kind of side with the tenant no matter what? Or are they landlord friendly where it's like pay to play, like pay to stay? Like this is, you got to pay to be here. Is there anything, we got about 5 minutes left before we start wrapping this up. What have I missed or what have we missed that you want to touch on that you think is important for first responders and people who are listening that are investors?
So it's really to get yourself together and in order first, right? It starts with your operating agreement. That's, I think, something we didn't really touch base on. Again, I'm in Maryland. So in Maryland, there's no legal requirement for you to have an operating agreement, for you to have an LLC. But if you don't have an operating agreement, I'm breaking your corporate veil right away. And if you have a operating agreement that you like bought online on Zoom Legal, I'm breaking your corporate veil. So if you are a startup investor, just like you're going to think about like, you know, flipping a house or wholesaling or signing, make sure you have yourself set up right, because the moment that you get sued, because it's not if, it's when. If you're doing this right, there will be a time where a lawyer calls you. And you need to have yourself set up in a way that you're not going to start sweating bullets because now your family's on the line and your home is on the line and you didn't do something right. Get your stuff in order first. Give me a quick call. Just talk about it. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to walk you through it, even if you don't retain me, but don't wait until it's too late. And now all of a sudden, you know, you're in a situation.
Tyler or Mike, have you guys ever had to talk to a lawyer about anything to do with real estate before?
Yes.
Like what?
Yeah. And I was told by the same thing that Diana just said. They said, hey, you're now officially an investor. One was a wholesale. One was, I've had twice and I can't even think of the other one. But what she was saying is, it was just recently. So I got a letter served by an attorney because there was a Google, this is hilarious. There's a Google My Business listing that showed my address with this company's name. And they kept threatening to sue me unless I removed it. And I was like, I can't remove something that I don't own or have any control over. But they kept sending more and more threatening letters. So this time, after the first time, I gave it to my attorney. He responded immediately, and then they've never responded back to me. So I would say, yes, I have. And then 2, I learned a very valuable lesson. I can't get emotional about it. Got to send it to my attorney. They're going to tell me what I can and cannot do and take care of it from there. But the first time, I lost a lot of sleep over it. Yeah, because I was like, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to fight this.
Right.
So,
Mike, how about you?
Most of my stuff's just been like contract stuff. But all the time get threatened with, I'm going to call my attorney. I just literally over the weekend, same thing. I have somebody answer phones over the weekend. The one gate at one of our storage facilities was not working properly. So like the guy was there trying to get in, couldn't get in. And while we was on the phone, the maintenance guy got there and he's like, I'm calling my attorney and blah, blah, blah. It's just like, people always throw that line out there. Like I said, feel free, call your attorney. They're probably going to laugh, but no, knock on wood, nothing that's really come to fruition, really. Just a lot of back and forth threats by some folks.
The only time I've had it is I had a lot line disagreement. So I had the survey done. My survey said one thing. The neighbor wanted to develop the land next to mine. He had one done. and he wanted to move over like a couple of feet so he could clear it for a driveway or something stupid. And I was like, he had his lawyer call me, and his lawyer's a complete dickhead. And I'm like, screw you, buddy. Like, there's nothing you can say to me that's going to bother me. Like, go fuck yourself. So I called the owner. I was like, and I know who it was. He's a real big investor, but he's an absolute country bumpkin. And I was like, hey man, like, what's going on? Like, why do you have this dickhead calling me? He's like, I didn't realize it was being a dickhead, man. I'm sorry. I was just trying to get a lot line adjustment done. I was like, what do you need? He's like, well, I was going to give you the back, and I was going to take some of the front if you're cool with it. I was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, there's ways to go about doing this, but when you get into like a stickler with somebody who's an absolute like pain in your butt, it's definitely somebody like Diana to hire to kind of see through and sort through this kind of stuff, because they know the legalese, and that's the important thing. So I'm glad people like you are out there, Diana. I think you've helped out a lot of our mutual friends. If they wanted to get a hold of you, how would they reach out to you?
My cell number, it's 443-739-6724. Should be a text.
Brave. God, you're brave.
I WAL on a news station this morning, and I gave my cell phone number on local TV. And after I like walked away, I went to my phone, I checked my phone, and my like staff of 16 were all texting, freaking out. They're like, she just gave her phone number. And I was just like, it's fine.
Oops.
It's fine.
Everything is fine. Everything is okay. All right. So the law group is Diana Kahn. I had to pull it up.
DK Law Group.
DK Law Group. And you're the premier real estate law group for the Maryland real estate investors. And I think you're a dime a dozen. I think you don't blow smoke up people's asses. I think you're very direct, and I can really truly appreciate the fact that you're not the kind of person who beats around the bush. So thank you for being a quality person and a investor friendly and firefighter, first responder friendly, even if we had to lie about being the power of attorney.
Happy to do it. And we're going to be sending an email out more like this way, because it's really hard to find all the firefighters information. But for like, we're having a fireman appreciation week, and anybody who doesn't have a POA is getting one as long as they contact us. So I'll send you that list as well, because if anybody who needs like their stuff redone, we do it free. I mean, obviously I'm trying to get like a will out of you, but we'll talk about that when you want a free POA.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, guys.
Thank
you for having me.
Thank you for hopping on. I got to run.
We'll have you back in a couple months. Thanks, Diana.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.